Hi, this is Stephen Krein. I'm here with my partner, Dan Sullivan, for the Free Zone Frontier podcast. How are you, Dan?
Great, Steve. And I'm where I was when we last talked, and you're where you were when we last talked. Everybody's where they were the last time we talked.
That's for sure. And I'm excited to do this part two of our discussion around the Scary Times manual and the Scary Times strategies. We had gotten through 8 of the 10 strategies for the discussion, so we'll wrap up with the 2 last ones. I want to go over the first 8 ones just for those who might not have listened to the last one in a couple weeks. But for me, what I really want to dig into is what you've learned over the last 3 or 4 weeks, seeing the Scary Times manual once again, 20 years from when it was first created, take hold and both be implemented and put into practice. But before we do, let me just go over the first 8 and then we can kind of pick up with 9 and 10. Does that work for you?
Sure. Thanks, Steve.
All right. So number 1, forget about yourself, focus on others. Number 2 is forget about your commodity, focus on relationships. Number 3 was forget about the sale, focus on creating value. Number 4 was forget about your losses, focus on your opportunities. Number 5 was forget about your difficulties, focus on your progress. Number 6 was forget about your future, focus on today. Number 7 was forget about who you were, focus on who you can be. And number 8 was forget about events, focus on your responses. And before we pick up at 9 and 10, you've seen all of these either be put into practice or attempted to be put into practice over the last 3 or 4 weeks as we're kind of recording this in mid-April. So for depending on how long you've been either quarantined or kind of hunkered down, it's been somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, Steve, you and I live in a kind of special world, and we live in a world where entrepreneurs are the majority. My feeling is that entrepreneurs have gotten accustomed to living with scary times throughout their entrepreneurial career. But generally, their scary times are lonely scary times. It's cash flow, it's particular issues they're having in their business, particular issues. And actually, most of the entrepreneurs are kind of enjoying actually having company during scary times. And the other thing, if you go back 20 years when the 9/11 was the scary times, and this was something that got written within a couple of weeks after scary times for actually a special meeting in New York City for our New York clients, and you were there.
I remember it well.
You were there. That the means of communication, of course, are, a million times better than they were 20 years ago. So the ability to communicate virtually has made things a lot easier this time. And, we've grown as a company. I've grown as an entrepreneur in my use of scary times. But I would say that a lot of the scary times, without me realizing, kind of made its way into the program over the last 20 years. In other words, we don't have the 10 strategies anywhere, but there's just a lot of tools that we have in Strategic Coach, which presume that you have scary times attitudes, that you have scary times mindset. So I just got off a call prior to our coming on together here, Steve, with 4 of the Free Zone program, which is the top. And this was Tony Caldwell and Anand from Mumbai and India, and Chip Mock from Detroit, and a new person, Steve Kreisberg, who just joined Free Zone. He's from Oregon. They were all talking about how they've actually used the last 4 weeks to expand their ambitions, that their ambitions for the new normal that's going to come after the scary times, these ambitions are a lot bigger than they were when they went into the scary times. So that was probably a different kind of conversation, that you might hear in other places. And my ambitions have gone bigger too. I've got specific ways my ambitions have gone a lot bigger.
It's interesting because I've seen almost in the matter of weeks, it seems like a decade or 2 of what people used to think was going to be really far off, at least for our community of entrepreneurs working on healthcare transformation, healthcare innovation. We've seen what people expected to be another decade or two away from achieving kind of come into focus almost immediately and condensed into today. And so that requires almost a recontextualization of goals and ambition around what needs to be achieved. So we've seen regulatory environment change overnight, whether it's being able to practice across state lines or FDA regulation or other things that seemed either impossible or very far off from being able to be possible being achieved. We've seen sales cycles, we've seen solutions being needed on the front lines, and all red tape kind of removed from getting there. And so it's been really interesting to see how, you're right, entrepreneurs are almost, always living in scary times, but now the rest of the world is too. Mm-hmm. And so I have seen the entrepreneurs in my world be able to respond much differently than everybody else. So these strategies that you outlined 20 plus years ago, really extraordinary from the perspective of how timeless they are. Each one of them, like you said, even if they're not explicit in what you're doing with the strategy, they play out. So these last two strategies that we didn't review yet that I want to touch on, I think get to very much that issue, which is number 9, forgetting about what's missing, focus on what's available.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that one?
Well, first of all, key to being a really successful business person, an entrepreneur, is that you just take what you have and you make it more valuable. You take the usefulness of people and you make them more valuable. You take the usefulness of technology and you make them better. And my feeling is that that's repeatable every time you make a jump in terms of productivity, in terms of profitability. You get to play the game over again. It's a bit like Groundhog Day, except every day in Groundhog Day it gets better. Okay, but there's a repetition that you're able to do. So the first thing that we did is that we went after 2 things in our company. One was teamwork, the other one was technology, because these are both multipliers. And if you can get them in sync with each other, you get more than a doubling, you get a tripling. So, like everyone else did, Steve, your company, every other entrepreneurial company, the first thing is that we had to go virtual backstage. So, it took us about 2-3 days. We have over 100 team members who are spread out over 8 time zones, from London, England on the east to LA on the west. And so we had to get everybody settled. And then we had to go through a real fast period where we say, ordinarily there are people coming to live workshops in Los Angeles, Chicago, Toronto, and London, but they aren't going to be over probably the next 2.5 months. So we had to do some thinking how we were going to do it. We couldn't put on 8-hour virtual workshops because I had tested, and I said, nobody's going to sit there for 8 hours, I have to tell you. So we hit upon 2 hours that you have a very, very significant, very concentrated session where Zoom, fortunately, has really arrived on the scene with very good capabilities and the ability to take a large group of people and then break it down into groups of 3s and 4s and have that be a very meaningful 15 or 20 minutes, and then people come back and share. And you can do a 2-hour where you do that twice in 2 hours, and that seems to work. It's really great. You can send them PDFs beforehand, you can send them audios, you can send them videos. I would say that the usefulness of those 2-hour sessions is probably equal to 4 hours of in-person time. People are much more concentrated. Yeah. And you really notice when people aren't there, like they're showing up, but they're not actually there. I mean, people's attention is much more observable on Zoom than it is in real time, So there's all sorts of, I'm keeping track of what seems to be different, what seems to be the same, what seems to be better. I haven't put it all together because I don't have a topic for it yet, but it's very, very interesting. What about you, Steve?
I mean, similarly, we've always done on the backstage of had a virtual operation. We have companies in 25 countries. And so we've always relied on Zoom to host workshops and sessions, very short ones like you're talking about, 2 hours exactly. But what we found was we've had office hours available for our companies for the last 7 years, 8 years, available twice a week. 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, Tuesdays and Thursdays for an hour. And quite frankly, I was on the first couple, and then our team was running them, and a few people would show up to kind of have questions answered or connect. And we decided 4 weeks ago to really lean into, or re-lean into, I should say, office hours as an opportunity for really everybody to really connect on a more regular basis, starting with us who are leading the company, really guiding conversation a little bit like you described with both a PDF, with a topic, with an expert. We've had anywhere from, I'd say on the low end 50 companies to over 110 on each one of them over the past 4 weeks. And we do them twice a week. But what's really fascinating is there's a little chat feature built into Zoom that is also, I think, complementary to the verbal or visual conversations going on video. And the collaboration that's been happening on the chat in these office hours, which I don't want to call them have been throwaways. They're always a valuable feature thing that we offer to our companies. But these are now so well attended that the take-home value for everybody attending is so much greater. And so we now have these 1 hour calls twice a week. I told you how many people are on, but there are, for almost every single one of them, take-home collaborations. I just learned on Friday that there is a new collaboration between two of our companies coming together because they learned about each other in the dialogue that was happening on the call. And they're going to be explaining their collaboration on tomorrow's call. But in healthcare, when companies are from all over the world, there's ideas being developed and even created in different environments. And so when you take I know you love to call us the world's largest R&D lab for health innovation. When you take entrepreneurs working on health innovation from all over the world and put them together for an hour, somewhat in an unstructured format, right? We have a guiding topic or a guiding expert, but there's a lot of really open discussion able to take place. Nobody's really talking about what's missing. It's all about what everyone's doing, and they're finding a great deal of inspiration from each other.
There's a sort of a line down the middle of each of our 10 strategies for scary times. And you could say that the mindset of the person is either a scarcity mindset or abundance mindset. They're a pessimistic person or they're an optimistic person, or they're a creator or they're a complainer, But you're starting to get a nice slice of just where people line up, in their lives. Are they a taker or are they a contributor, And for some reason, I think during scary times, the division is much sharper. The contrast is much clearer of how this person comes across. Chris Voss, who's now running his own company.
I love spending time with him at the Free Zone event in February.
Yeah, and his whole point that people don't rise to the occasion, they actually default to how prepared they were for something unexpected to happen. And my feeling is that entrepreneurs are probably in the premium class for being used to unexpected things happening and knowing how to respond. And the ones who have negative attitudes get wiped out. They get wiped out long before a big event like this happens. You got to be someone who just takes a look at the cards that you have. You can win with any hand. It's not a function of the deal. It's a function of the skill.
Well, it's interesting because that's actually a perfect lead into strategy number 10. Forget about your complaints, focus on your gratitude. Wow, have I learned a lot about not only entrepreneurs in my world, both friends and in startup health, but it's really amazing to see how many people spend time and energy complaining about whether it's the government's response to quarantining, whether it's the different policies that are either being implemented or not being implemented, versus those that are just spending every day being productive and focusing on what they can control.
Yeah, well, I don't know what it is. I mean, I grew up, and I know you did, Steve, I grew up with there was enough, but there wasn't more than enough from a financial standpoint. I never had a feeling of lack when I was growing up, but I learned later that I have siblings who did, and they were ashamed of it and they were embarrassed by it. But they're ashamed and embarrassed today about other things. So it's, it wasn't about anything happening outside of themselves. It's just a function of, how they approach it. But, I read history. I'm very interested in geopolitics. And, if you live where we live, I live in Toronto, you live in New York City, you got good health and you got a reasonably good brain and everything. Boy, I have to tell you, there's not much to complain about these days. Vis-a-vis history, vis-a-vis the way things were historically. So, gratitude is the ultimate sanitizer, that if in your brain you have gratitude towards something, it's virtually impossible for you to have any kind of negative thought or negative feeling towards anything. I appreciate Babs, you appreciate Rebecca and your children and everything else. So I just appreciate everything. And I've just noticed I get up today, and I was doing it because I'm actually going deep on each of the strategies. So I'm creating podcasts, 45-minute podcasts. And
with Shannon, I've been listening to them. They're fantastic.
So the next quarterly book, we already started it. So Hamish and I were doing strategy number 4 this morning. And I said, we're doing the podcasts anyway. They can be transcribed and they can be put into print form. But the thing that I'm thinking here, Steve, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on this, I'm taking people who have been valuable to me, but in my mind, they're even more valuable than I thought they were. And I'm trying to communicate this on a continual basis, like, boy, oh boy, have people come through. And I mean, you're holding together a global organization. There's a lot of quiet capabilities in your system that make that possible.
Yeah, what's interesting about you described the impact in your mind, because we've been building this global army of entrepreneurs who are committed to health moonshots for the last, 8 or 9 years. And there's been a little bit of potential echo chamber for a while there where you feel like you're just talking to the industry and you're just talking to the same people. And while you're attracting a larger and larger community of people who are beating the drum about innovation needs to come, telemedicine, digital health, use data to be more precise with your prescriptions, et cetera. There was this quote that I loved that I heard Lenin made, which is, there are decades where nothing happens and then there are weeks where decades happen. I feel like that's exactly true to where we are today. And the people inside of our global army, and, there's 300 plus companies in 25 countries, but there are certain of them that are completely mobilized to either reimagine what they were doing or pick one of the things that they were doing and going deep. And there are those that are paralyzed. And it's really interesting to see how, when the time comes, who's ready to kind of lean in and make things happen. I'm really struck by your 3 Ps that you were talking about one of your podcasts with Shannon, because it was about this decision every morning when you wake up on how you're going to not only conduct your day, but think throughout the day. Can you touch on those 3 Ps? Because I think they touch on exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they kind of encapsulate all 10 strategies in 3 words, because the first thing is I'm just going to be present. And I was thinking about it on Saturday because I make a trip into the shopping district every Saturday. I got my mask on, I got my gloves on, and Canadians really follow the rules. I have to tell you, Canadians, they follow the rules in normal times and they double down on the rules in the scary times. But I was outside a Gourmet. There's a particular Gourmet store, it's a gourmet shopping store, but they have great fresh vegetables, better than Whole Foods does. And I had to wait out on the street, 6 feet apart. They have it marked in the sidewalk. And 2 things, how you always get shouters. These are people who on the street talk to themselves, but then they shout out at others. So there was a guy standing across the street and he said, you two, 6 feet, you're too close. So he was giving directions. And I said, oh, this is fun. He's providing early morning entertainment. But the other thing, in a storefront across the street, an alteration had been made, and there was this big, almost like billboard, and it was 3-minute pizzas. And it was well done. I mean, this was not a slap it together. And they had taken a section of a store. They had a new front window, and they had sort of like a little cash machine, an ATM apparatus, and then they had a slot. And then there was a screen, and you went to the screen, and then you clicked a button, and somebody came on live, and you put in your order, what you wanted on the pizza. They had, about 10 different choices. You put in your credit card. I watched, and somebody did it, and out came the pizza. So I was sitting there watching that, and I said, boy, this is so well done. I bet this isn't the only one. I bet they've just spotlighted high traffic areas where people are waiting on the street and where people are, still walking. And I said, what a neat idea. What a neat idea. I didn't walk over because I couldn't give up my place in line. And then I went to Whole Foods, which is inside a shopping center. There was some stuff I had to get there. So I was 20 minutes in line for one, and then Whole Foods was 30 minutes. And I was just watching people. Everybody was kind of good humored. And I said, people should really take time out just to remember and be conscious. You'll never see this again in your life. This is just a interesting slice of history. And it's really, really neat just to be observant what's happening. But I have to tell you, I noticed on the hours for Whole Foods that if I had arrived at 9 o'clock, I was there at 10. I could have taken advantage of the fact that I'm a senior, and I've never done that. I'm 75, movies, I just never, and I said, I'm going to trigger my senior advantage here next week. I'm going to come at 9. I said, anything that gets me to the front of the line, I'm going to utilize right now. But it just really, really struck me that I'm just very, very thankful just to observe this situation. It's a kind of a neat.
Yeah, you were present.
Yeah, very, very present.
Very present.
I feel very positive. And the one thing there isn't so much that I'm feeling positive, but that other people feel positive after they've had an encounter with me. So all my emphasis.
Can you stop there right now? Because I actually think it's a big deal. Because this idea, so the 3 Ps, present, positive, and productive. But you just talking about how you want people to feel after their interaction with you. I think so few people think about that simple idea. Expand on that for a second. Well, I agree with you, and I try to do the same thing, but I think the idea that you're even thinking about it is fascinating.
Yeah, well, in our world, we're entrepreneurs, we're company owners. In my company, I share the leadership with Babs Smith. We're a big deal, in other people's lives. I mean, whether you want to admit it or not, you're the boss. Okay, you're the boss. And I said, throughout this period, that's going to be a good experience for everybody else. First of all, to my utmost, I'm going to inform myself what other people are doing. And I'm going to say, I heard what you did there, and that was really, really great. So they notice that I'm doing it. But the other thing is that most of my interchange with people are projects. It's a Zoom call project. It's a podcast project. It's working on a book project. It's creating a new thinking tool project. And the person who's working on the other side, artist, writer, sound technician in the tech department and everything else, as far as that part of their experience that day that included Dan, that was a positive experience. So I'm just alert all day that I have some opportunities to be positive with them, And I'm much more conscious of it now than I am during normal times because they may be having a lot of things negative in their personal life, and I don't know that, or, things are frustrating them. But when they add up positive and negative, at the end of the day, I'm on the positive side of the ledger as far as their experience goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's the batteries included, batteries not included, but it's the notion that you're acknowledging that there's a lot of batteries not included. News, there's a lot of batteries not included. People, there's a lot of batteries not included. Things going on. Concerns. And so you could rest assured that it's all not terrific these days in people's lives 24/7. So your choice to be one of the positive charges is really impactful. And I feel it, having interacted with you over the last 3 or 4 weeks, both on our free zone calls and the workshop last week and things like that. I try to emulate that as well in my world. I want to touch on the third P, productivity and being productive. So, I've always thought about freedom of time, money, relationships, and purpose as a gift and also a choice. But your choice of thinking in terms of just a 24-hour period versus a month or a quarter or even a year. Can you talk about your thinking around being productive every day? And I know you've always had a strategy around making sure you're productive every day, even if it's being done by 11 o'clock. so to speak, with what your priorities were. But what does it mean to be productive every day for you in these times?
Yeah, well, I think in an earlier strategy, I go deeper in it in my podcast. So this would be number 6. The word future and past are really interesting concepts. The reason is because nobody's actually had any experience of being in either one of them. We talk about the future as if it's a place, but when we actually get to the point in the future, it looks a lot like the present. I mean, it's the only thing we actually do experience in life is the present. We do have ideas which are called future. We do have ideas that are called past, but they're abstractions. They're structures that we've created inside of our brain to deal with time. It's like we learn how to deal with distance and we learn how to deal with time. So what I do is I've got a place in the future, and we talked about this. I've actually created a thinking tool called the first 100 days, that when things become normal again, in the sense that people can congregate and they can mingle, it'll be a different normal, but it's normal in the sense that the social distancing rules aren't there. I have a place that's called the first 100 days. Once we get the all clear signal to return to work, where people are in the office and they can meet personally and they can go to restaurants and they can do everything else, I'm getting everyone to focus just on the first 100 days. There's day number 1 when we can do it, day before we couldn't, so that's day 1, first 100 days. And every thought I have about the future goes into a box called the first 100 days. And my goal is for our whole company that the first 100 days after scary times, this particular scary times, is the single most productive and profitable 100-day period in the history of the company. So we're all operating at a very high level right now during the scary times, but when everything's available to us, we're going to operate at even higher productivity and profitability. What I find is that really focuses people's attention. It's not the future, it's the first 100 days. So I've given a name to the future, and It's got a beginning and it's got an end. Day 1, day 2.
Are you thinking about it like a parking lot of dream and aspirational things so that you could focus on today?
Very good term. Yeah, that's a very good term. It's a parking lot. Okay. But it has some dimensions to it. It's not forever. Sure. It's 3 months plus a 10-day bonus, so you get a little extra on it. And I found that people have been very responsive to that. And you can't do everything during the first 100 days, so you got to prioritize. But that's a good use of the idea of the future. And I think there's going to be some noticeable changes publicly in the realm of politics and the realm of business publicly, that a lot of stuff, which I always thought was sort of pie in the sky stuff, about this changing and this changing, everything else. I think people are going to get more specific. I think they're going to get more realistic. They've had good experience of certain available tools being more useful than they thought. And I think there's going to be kind of a maximizing period that the public goes into, where we complain less, we criticize less, we're more polite, we're more thankful, we're more productive, we're more profitable. I think that's going to happen.
I love that. So if you have a parking lot for the future things to go, how do you think about each 24-hour period? So it's a nice way of thinking about this notion of, if an idea comes to mind, it might not be for today, it might be for the first 100 days. What are you doing to set up your days for success?
First of all, my schedule, I'm sure you've found this for yourself, Stephen. My schedule is actually a lot more regular being cooped up than it ever was when you had the whole city at your disposal. Sure. So, I've really slept better. I mean, 8 is the minimum. I've gone 8.5 hours of sleep. I've always been a sleeper, and I sleep and I dream. So I don't have any problem. And then I get up, and then my main exercise period is immediately after I give up, and I have a number. It's determined by heart rate monitor and calculator on the computer. There's 1,000 calories burned of exercise. And once I cross 1,000, then my exercise is, if I get more exercise, it's a bonus, but that's what I get in. And that's before I've eaten anything. So I do that before eating, and then I eat. And at 8 o'clock every morning, Toronto time, I have a session with Hamish McDonald, who's my cartoonist. So we're working on the book, and every day he gets a lot done. One of the things that's really important for morale, Steve, is that you have a feeling that really solid, productive work is getting done every day. That we were here yesterday and we're here today. And I think that's morale, momentum, and motivation. I think it's very, very important to have tangible proof that you're not just spinning your wheels.
Yeah. So
you're an activator. Not doing something drives you crazier than it drives me.
I'm good with my 5 days. I've treated weekends like vacations for 20 years since you introduced, and I was able to get my head around the free day, focus day, buffer day time system. So I am really good with that during the week. And I actually am able to do the opposite on weekends and chill out and watch movies and hang with the kids and the family. But I'm interested in going back to one thing on your success of a day, a work day, or a focus day, I should say, because I'm sure you're able to differentiate still your focus day and buffer day.
Yeah.
But what's a successful day? I choose 3 things to call my day successful. I actually wrote down the 3 Ps on my daily worksheet now. I've kind of created a little bit of a hybrid of a worksheet with not only the 3 Ps listed because of how important each day is now to remember to be present, positive, and productive. But I also love this notion that you're taking each day apart between what worked and what didn't work. And it's not just a positive focus at the end of the day, but it's also an improvement, even if it's slight, on each subsequent day. So how are you thinking about your days differently related to structure around that?
In Coach, we have a thing called the experience transformer, and then we have a mini version like we do the impact filter. There's a big impact filter, and there's a mini version of the impact filter. So I really use these tools a lot, and they're right on my desktop, and I can do them. And it's really, really interesting that when you become very tool specific, in other words, you're using it every day, you're using it on different projects. But the experience transformer, it was just a file maker tool that my team actually created for me. So it looks like the actual form, but it's just the file maker technology. So what I do is I say these 5 things, and usually some of them were known at the beginning of the day, but things popped up during the end of the day, or I had an insight or something unusual happen. But I put 5 things down that were measurably productive, that this was very good, real progress was made. I do that at the end of the day. And then I also say...
And that could be a meeting, a call.
Yeah, us finishing this off is a big deal because I wouldn't have wanted the 9 and 10 not to be, that we never went back and got it. So this is a big deal. So what you and I are doing right now will be one of my 5 tonight when I look at it. And then, we got into an incredible discussion in my Zoom call with 4 Free Zone people about how if you have been local before scary times, afterwards you're going to be national. If you were national before scary times, after scary times you're going to be global. That everybody's going to up their game by a jump. This is like a power of 10. Each of them has a power of 10. We had Ninad Turpis, who's from Mumbai, and he's a big deal in India. Like India has 28 states, and he's got representation in all 28 states. And he said, it's really interesting. He said, before scary times, I was thinking about taking what we learned about India and how we can operate in India, which is now the biggest population country. It's about 1.4. China's starting to lose population. They reached peak population 7 years ago. So China's starting to lose population, but India is continuing to add population. And he said, I was thinking about going Middle East, Northern Africa, and everything. And he says, now it's maximize what you have in India and become a magnet for other people to bring their stuff to India and then make the connections with the United States. He said, my whole future, it's India and the United States, and India is a magnet on our side of the world, and the United States is the magnet on the other side of the world. So he said, that's completely changed my views, how we're doing it. Yeah. It was really interesting to talk about it, but all the three, Tony Caldwell, who operates in 5 states, Chip Mock operates in about 10 states, and Steve Kreitzberg operates in about 4 states. All of them said, we're probably going to go to 20 states, 25 states after this, The other thing, Steve Kreitzberg said, he says, what I'm seeing about Free Zone, because he's only been, to one workshop, and that was last week. And he said, it's the only place where you can have unlimited ambition.
And not be judged.
Well, not
actually be encouraged. Yeah.
Well, not even judged, but encouraged and supported and, told. I'm reading this great book on envy written by a German in the 1960s by the name of Helmut Scheck. And I'm on my 4th reading. I don't usually reread books, but this one, that envy, there's 2 sides to envy. One of the sides to envy is that you're envious. Okay. And envy doesn't mean that you want what someone else has. Envy means that you want them to lose it. Okay. So jealous is wanting what someone else has, but envy is malign. It's malignant. It's a malicious kind of thing. And then there's the avoidance of envy, that you never let people know what you're planning, what you're dreaming, how you're succeeding, because you don't want to have people who are envious to wish bad thoughts about you. And what I'm feeling is that the Free Zone, we're going right up the middle between these two things happening in society, that we're not envious of the other Free Zoners. Not only that, but we're happy to tell the other Free Zoners our success, because they'll get value from our telling them how we're succeeding, and I'll get value. Yeah. So it's very, very interesting. I'm just obsessed with this book.
Repeat the book name again. I want to put it in the show notes.
ENVY, it's just that. And it's mainly about the sociology. And he said that envy is how societies actually keep things in balance. Either being envious, but it's not a good thing. To be envious is not a good thing, but, we all have the capacity for it. And the other thing is not wanting to be the object of other people's envy. And the author's name is Helmut, Helmut, Scheck.
Yep, I see it now. We'll put it in here. It was translated in 1970, written in 66 and translated in 70. This is great. I want to be mindful of time.
This was fun.
This was great. As a kind of wrap up with a little bow of these 10 strategies, I can tell you they've been almost an anchor for me to be thinking about and even filtering people and thoughts and strategies that we have. It's almost more valuable than it was the first time it was taken hold of what I was thinking in 2001. And now, again, I think has such an important, meaningful part of what we're seeing as the future. And so I appreciate it once again, you putting these out. We're going to put a link to download the Scared Times manual that this is based off of. I love the perspective, Dan, that you give on not just what they mean, but kind of what they mean today and how they play. What's your biggest insight from really the last 4 weeks of kind of digging deeper, not just with me, but with the others who've been having conversations about this with you?
Well, I'll tell you what I told the other Free Zone entrepreneurs an hour before we came on. I said, I'm really happy and proud of how prepared I was psychologically, emotionally, to play a really good role during this period of time. And I think that the opportunity to go back over the scary times was just a really good checklist of skills that I've really developed since I've wrote the first 3 or 4 pages back in 2001. So I'm a really kind of solid dude. I'm playing a really great role right now. I'm doing really good work. And, when the new normal comes and we're able to maximize all our learning and maximize all of our improvements, I feel really terrific. It's all gain and no gap. I just measuring where I was and where I am now. I'm not measuring against some sort of ideal of who I should have been during this period of time. I'm not thinking that way at all. So I think that's the biggest thing I'm doing.
I couldn't agree more to confirm how you're feeling about the role you play, literally with your words and your sharing so much, but these strategies and how big of a role they play in so many people's lives. And we're helping spread that and obviously put that into action. So thank you, Dan. Always
Okay.
love spending the time. It goes way too fast, but we'll speak soon, and stay safe and healthy, and hi to Babs.
Okay, and go into the next room and give Rebecca a hug from me.
I will.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.